Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. Today, we're talking about freedom. And if I'm moving not quite in a freedom dance mode, it's because I've spent the last 3 days with a 9-year-old. And yesterday we went roller skating. Yes, I fell down. Yep, I can feel it today. And it was funny, at Discovery Green in downtown, they have an ice rink. Well, in the spring, they convert it to a roller rink. And I'm going to blame it on the surface of the roller rink. It was not really what I'm used to. And it was, they said it'll come right back to you. Well, it didn't come right back. I did kind of, by the end of the hour and a half we were there, I began to kind of get it again. But I thought I was doing all right. And then there was another dad about my age, who obviously has never eaten a carbohydrate in his life. And he was so, that thing was just moving. And then there was it was all 70s disco music. And then at one point there was a moment and he jumped up and turned around and started a backward skate right on the beat. I thought, man, you're making me look really bad today. But anyway, it was a great time. And it was really fun. So today I'm talking about freedom. And if you want to see freedom, be around children. If you want to see what it looks like, and Micah is 9, and that age, 9 and 10, 4th and 5th grade, I find it's a beautiful age because their understanding, their language is so much richer, but that full-on self-consciousness of the teenage years has not set in yet. And she's still innocent in a lot of ways. Willful, but innocent. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. This is one of my favorite quotes by Ernest Holmes. The divine plan is one of freedom. The inherent nature of man is ever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom, because freedom is the birthright of every living soul. And we talk a lot about, in our spiritual teaching, the way that we can manifest our good, the way we can free ourselves from old ideas and limiting thoughts. And really, it all does come down to the idea of freedom. And if you think about it, any challenge that you're having in your life is because there's something blocking your freedom there. If there's an experience of lack in your finances, it's freedom that's not there, right? And if we're experiencing trouble in our relationships, we're not free to commune and express with one another. If there's something going on with our bodies in terms of illness, if there's a lack of physical freedom. And so if we can begin to move into today's message, today's lesson, with this idea that underneath all conditions there is a thought, there is a belief, and if I can move from the outer world into the creative mind that is within me, and find my freedom here, then I can be truly free and begin to express a life of freedom. That's what it's really about. We do inhabit this conditioned reality, and we are not going to be free to, how many of you have flying dreams? You ever had those dreams where you just leave the earth and you soar? It's such an amazing, thrilling experience. Well, I don't know of anybody. I guess maybe hang gliders and pilots and high divers, I don't know. But most of us don't get to experience. We're pretty much feet on the ground most of the time. And I'm very aware of people like our lovely Joseph here, who has a different way of moving around this world. And we're all limited in some ways. So the freedom that we're looking for is not freedom from physical constraint. The freedom we're looking for is about the experience of life. And that comes from an internal realization of the presence of God. It's who we are. And no matter what our physical limitations, whether you're a 55-year-old getting on roller skates foolishly. I mean, the last time I did on them, I think I was like 13. Or whatever your freedom is that you're not able to fully express in the physical world, there is freedom for you in the spiritual world. And that is really what we're seeking. It is interesting seeing children, and my little girl, many of you know the story, she's not mine biologically or legally, but I'm the only daddy in her life, and we have a very close relationship. And she is a willful child. When she wants it now. And I don't know if you know any kids like that, but there's just a strong desire to have the experience, to get the thing, and a lot of it is based around sugar. And there is a desire to get it and get it now. And anything that stands in the way of that, she is bereft and inconsolable when she doesn't get what her freedom is. And so just, seeing as she matures, it's getting better. She's learning more and more. And last night we watched the new movie, Yes Day. Have you seen it? It's on Netflix. Where for these kids, they make a deal with their parents, and for one day, their parents do not get to say no to them. And there are some ground rules. They can't drive more than 20 miles. They can't do anything that's harmful or illegal and all this. But it's really an amazing, funny movie. And at the end of it, you get to see that what the kids thought was freedom isn't freedom. That they weren't ready for, their parents were protecting them in ways they didn't understand until they got the mirror of their own desire back to them in a way. So, this is from Emerson. Freedom is not the right to live as we please, but the right to find out how we ought to live in order to fulfill our purpose. Do you get that? Freedom is not getting what we want all the time, without any restrictions. That's not what true spiritual freedom is. Freedom is to discover who we are in God and to live a life of fulfillment, living as we ought to live. And I was thinking about this idea of that childish thing, because I still have that in me too, where I think if I could just get those outer circumstances, if I could just make those people act better, if I could just get this thing working the way I want it, then I would be free. And it's never true. That's not the source of our freedom, manipulating conditions. But freedom comes when we move into authentic experience and expression to live the life as God created us. Last week, I told the story of Edith Eger, the Auschwitz survivor, and who's now a 93-year-old fireball therapist and author. And one of the things that she talked about was blame and responsibility. Before she was on the cattle car driving to Auschwitz, and her mother, one of the last things her mother said to her before she was executed, she said, "Edith, they cannot take away what you put in your own mind." And those words continued to guide Edith through the whole experience of imprisonment and torture into her 20-year healing journey after. Because she would say that she was free from the Nazis, but she was not free in her heart and mind. She had more work to do. And she says this, that when we blame, we are a child again. When we blame, we are a child again. And we have placed ourselves back in that place where, well, if they would only, it's all your fault. You're the reason I'm not free. It's never true. But to really inhabit freedom, we take responsibility for our own experience. And we live in a time of great division. Has anybody else seen any blaming flying around on social media? Yeah, I've seen it. So I want to take a moment to reflect upon what we're seeing right now, and particularly honor the lives lost in Atlanta this past week. And I'm not sure you're aware, but the rise in violence against Asian Americans has risen 1,000% since the coronavirus pandemic. And there's been a lot of talk that this came from China and all of that. And it's what we're seeing is people who are not free, and they're inflicting their own bondage out into the outer world in violent, dehumanizing ways. Karen was sharing with me before the service. I didn't know about it. I was with the 9-year-old all day. But there was a scare of some gun violence, active shooter at the Galleria yesterday, and she was there with William and their grandchildren, and the terror. Siobhan shared with me today a story of a young girl you may have seen on the news, 6 years old, 5 years old, who was shot for spilling water. Her mother wasn't around to protect her, and this thing happened, and Siobhan knows the grandfather of this child. The violence that we see in our culture, it comes from people enslaved to a false idea. It comes from people who are so tormented and in such internal bondage, the only thing they can do is to dehumanize another and to act out, to try and get their freedom that way, if I can just get rid of them. It will never work. It's not the truth of who we are. Did you know Breanne Brown, she's been speaking about this a lot lately. She's really taking a stand for peace and against hatred. She has a couple of podcasts out there. And she's also, she's a research psychologist. She has a lot of depth of understanding and science behind the way this works. And she's been saying a lot lately that we biologically are not wired to harm other human beings. We have like a safety switch in us that when we see another fellow human being, we know not to harm them, not to inflict violence upon them. And what happens instead is that switch gets flipped because we no longer see them as human. The process of dehumanizing. This, particularly when it comes to groups, when a group is dehumanized, this is how every genocide in the history of humanity has happened. Us and them. This is how violence against people of different ethnicities, of different sexual orientations or gender expressions, this is how it happens. I said, they are not like me, they are not human. And what I'm inviting us into today is to come back to an interior truth of freedom in spirit. Every time we're seeing an act of violence, we're seeing someone who is not free inside themselves. They are not in touch with their own authentic God-expressed creativity. And so the work that we do is here. Freedom is an inside job. Each of us comes with a whole wonderful set of baggage. Mine is probably Louis Vuitton, I'm sure, of family history and false beliefs handed down by generations and by our culture. But it's not true, and it's not me. It's just stuff that I came to believe is me. Bruce Lipton, I can never remember he's an epidemiologist. No, that's not right. He deals with genetic. No, I'm not going to get it, so I should stop trying right now. He's a geneticist who deals with environmental impact on genetics. That's what he is. And he says that every child until 6 years old has no filter. They just take in the messages about themselves and about humanity from their culture and from their family. And each of us did that when we were kids. And so we got a lot of wrong information. And our work in spiritual development and growth and healing is to see the truth and release the falsehood. And then we can step into being the loving, generous, creative soul that we are meant to be. It's an inside job. There's a wonderful phrase that says, as above, so below. And a lot of spiritual traditions have used this to understand the way that there is a divine expression that is here and available to us. And there is a partner to this phrase, as within, so without. And the first time I heard this expressed in a church service, it really irritated me. Because I was told that if I wanted to see what I believed, I could just look at my life circumstances. And that would show me exactly what I believe to be true about myself and the world. And my life was a wreck. And I did not want to take responsibility. There's that word again. It was so much easier to blame family, to blame economics, to blame all those things. And it was keeping me stunted in my growth. But if we can begin to do the healing within, we will see that we're then able to reshape our experience of life itself. The outer world it's an expression of our inner knowing. And we use affirmation not as a Band-Aid to try and cover up the false belief. That's the denial step. We release that false belief that there is no truth to the idea of illness in me. There is no truth to the idea of lack and limitation in me. I let it go, and then I can affirm the truth of my being. And what affirmation is, it's lining up the conditions of my life with the inner truth of my reality. It's not magic. It's simply directing in a conscious way the continuous flow of God's creative energy. And each of us has that gift. We are asked to do that. We do it individually and we do it collectively. This is Thomas Jefferson. You may remember this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we're back to this inner-outer dilemma. Michael, you just said that it's not about what's out there, it's about what's in here. And yet we're talking about the hurt and the hate out in our world. How do they relate? I did a lot of research for this morning's message, and in Unity and New Thought, we've often had an uncomfortable relationship with speaking about things out there in the collective, because we are a very individually oriented spiritual tradition. That no one can do your spiritual work for you, that's where we do the work. And so we don't always know how to approach it. And I decided to go back to our grandma and grandpa, basically, in New Thought, to the Transcendentalist movement. Do you all know, you probably studied it in school if you had any liberal arts education. Emerson and Thoreau, Alcott. It was this group of mostly Unitarian ministers in the early 1800s who began to really take Jesus at his word. That's what happened. You see, at that time, the common justification for Christian faith was the miraculous stories of Jesus, that he healed, he fed the sick, he fed the hungry, he walked on water, and because we believe those things factually and actually happen, now we believe in Jesus because of that. And these people began to look a little deeper beneath the surface of these stories, and they began to look at the teaching and the philosophy of Jesus in a new way. And they began to say, what if Jesus was actually serious about what he said? When he said, consider the lilies of the field. They neither toil nor sow. And have you ever seen Solomon arrayed with such beauty? And what that was pointing to for those early transcendentalist thinkers was there's something in nature. Maybe God's power and presence are there. And they looked to the natural world and they found divinity. They found God. They found power. And when Jesus said, the kingdom of God is, they'll say it's low here, low there. No, it is within you. They took Jesus at his word. And they looked within and they found God there too. And they began to write and began to philosophize on this idea that everything is connected. And there is this potentiality for transformation all around us and within us. And this movement rose up. And it rose up in such a way that the people who began to practice this philosophy, they were transformed. They had these experiences. They transcended mundane reality. They felt their connection to the universe. And then they came back to their lives and they saw around them the women could not own land or vote. Child labor was happening everywhere. And worst of all, that there were enslaved African people held as property in their land. And there was a great debate for about 3 decades in the Transcendental movement. Do we stand up against these things or do we focus on the individual? Where do we place our attention as a spiritual tradition, as a philosophical tradition? And there was, the two biggies, Emerson and Thoreau, they said, it's here. We're not going to speak out against what happens in the world. We're going to look at the individual experience. And there was a great debate, and for many years this happened until 1850, something happened. It was called the Fugitive Slave Act, and it was approved by the United States Congress that said this: if a person flees slavery and they go to a state where slavery is illegal, not only does the slave owner still own that person and have the right to do anything within their power to get them back, all of the people living in that free state have to help. They have to help return the slave back into slavery, captivity. And it was too much. That was just a step too far. It was a falsehood. It was a lie that just flew too much in the face of what these transcendentalist philosophers came to experience and understand about reality. That's not freedom. And they began to speak out. They were part, and it wasn't just them. From 1850 until the Civil War, until the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and thereafter, it became the dividing line in our culture. And we know hundreds of thousands lost their lives. But it became the point where we said, no more, it is a lie. And eventually, this lie that said one human being could own another human being as property was abolished. I was remembering about 6-7 years ago, I think it was, my predecessor, Rev Howard Caesar, he stood on this stage and he said, I don't like to dwell much in controversy, but at that time the state legislature had put forth a law that said that owning and carrying guns on Texas University and college campuses was going to be legal. They were changing the law to allow 18 and 19-year-old college students to carry guns. And something about it was just a lie too far for Howard. And he stood up here and he said, this is wrong. I disagree with this. And you may have a different experience, a different opinion. But as a leader, I'm going to tell you, I can't be in alignment with this. And he got flack for it. But he stood his truth. You're probably all clinching right now. What is Michael going to tell us next? I'm not doing that. I'm really not. I'm not going to make some bold stand here. But what I'm going to ask you to do is question. I'm going to ask you to do is look at your assumptions. When we're in a time of such turmoil and trouble, just know that we're not the first culture and society to deal with these deep questions of freedom and personal responsibility, and we won't be the last. But the pain that we're seeing around us, it is inviting us into the question of what do I believe and where do I draw the line? When I think about our beloved Karen Tudor huddled with her grandchildren behind a concession stand in the Galleria, that's too far. It's too far. The last thing I want to share with you today is, I kind of already did say it, but who you are is perfection. You are made in the image and likeness of God. And everything that doesn't line up with that perfection is a false idea and a belief. And so our work, as Michael Beckwith says, is not additive. Our spiritual work is subtractive. Our work is to find those false beliefs and release them. In the 12 steps, I learned it as discover, uncover, and discard. I discover something is not right in my thinking, and it keeps showing up in my world. And I look into it. And for me, my discovery process was new thought, application of denial, affirmation, affirmative prayer, talk therapy. I needed somebody who could look at my life from a different angle, and 12-step recovery. I did that discovery process. And I could let it go. That's the point where I want to end with this idea of discarding. Letting go of anything that isn't yours. Maybe it's so familiar. John chapter 31, starting with verse 31. That's not right. It's John 8:31. I wrote it down wrong. My Bible scholars will forgive me. To the Jews who believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you really are my disciples, and then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And they answered him, we're Abraham's descendants, have never been slaves. How can you say then we shall be set free? And Jesus replied, very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Sin is just anything that separates you from the full knowledge and embodiment of the truth of your being. Anything that stands in the way of you and your relationship to God, to the infinite, don't get hung up on the word. But as long as we're connected to and living in those false beliefs, we are in bondage. And what we're asked to do is surrender our assumptions, our beliefs, and move into a new place of freedom. You know, we've always heard that phrase, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think a few years ago, I think I coined something that, for me, feels a little bit better. There's always a way for the willing. There's always a way for the willing. If you're willing to question your assumptions, look at your biases, let go of those old beliefs, something amazing can happen. Hafiz. Love wants to reach out and manhandle us, break all our teacup talk of God. If you had the courage and could give the beloved his choice, some nights he would just drag you around by the room by your hair, ripping from your grip all those toys in the world that bring you no joy. Love sometimes gets tired of speaking sweetly and wants to rip to shreds all your erroneous notions of truth that make you fight within yourself, dear one, and with others, causing this world to weep on too many fine days. Yes, God wants to manhandle us, lock us inside of a tiny room with himself and practice his drop kick. The beloved wants to do us a great favor, hold us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But when we hear God is in such a playful, drunken mood, most everyone I know quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. I invite you to open to the possibility that you're already free. And now is the chance for you to release a thought that is holding you in captivity. I invite you to move into prayer with me now. In this moment, remembering the deepest, really the singular truth, and that is unity. All is one. There is only God, only pure, eternal life, infinite intelligence and love and peace. This is the nature of reality. And anything that is unlike that in my thoughts is a misapprehension, a false belief. And I'm willing now, God, to let it go. Release from me anything that is not the truth of myself being created in your image, God. I let it go. I surrender. In this moment, we opening and allowing this truth of God to be revealed in us. Where we've been holding others as wrong and enemy, let us drop that belief in that window. Let us instead see them as people who maybe have forgotten who they are. And we bring compassion and wisdom. In this moment, God, we open and allow, we surrender all of those limiting identities, the things that we have carried like armor to keep us safe, but they're not true. They're not who we are. And we open our hearts and we drop our defenses. Remake us, God, in your image. Renew and refresh us. We are the light of the world. Help us shine. Amen.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.